Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. This week, I welcome Ben Greenfield to the show, and we were supposed to do this in Austin in person. However, we're in lockdown at the time of the recording, still are. And we chat a lot about how Ben has been using his own philosophies and applying them to his life to keep himself and his family healthy. But beyond that, Ben is already sort of cutting edge when it comes to things with fitness, health, nutrition. He's been known for a lot of this stuff for a really long period of time, but we dive into a lot of other things beyond that. So of course we chat about things like his training regimen, how his nutrition is changing in breath work, cold work, how you can interject these things throughout your day. But also, we dive in a little bit about how he thinks about raising his kids, how he thinks about developing humans, how he sort of has this family approach to living that we've never talked about before, which I thought was super illuminating. So if you guys have a family, thinking about having a family like I am soon, then this might be interesting for you beyond what Ben usually chats about, which is always illuminating nonetheless. So tune in, and I hope you guys enjoy. This episode of the Natural State Podcast is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. Four Sigmatic is my favorite purveyor of all things mushrooms and adaptogens. Not sure why these things are important? Well, you can start with my episode I did with Four Sigmatic founder Tara on this subject, but just understand that mushrooms are not part of either animal or plant kingdom. They have unique health properties that are very, very well researched. Everything between boosting mental clarity all the way to naturally supporting the immune system, which I'm sure is something that everybody cares about these days. Also, Four Sigmatic products have been stocked in our kitchen at the Perfect Keto offices for years now and are probably the second most consumed product next to our own. Their most popular product of coffee mixed with chaga, cordyceps, lion's mane mushrooms, etc. Everything to basically take the jitter away from coffee and add a lot of brain boosting elements is the fan favorite at the office and keeps everyone powered through long days without crashing, like they probably would if they had an IV drip of cold brew like most other startups do. Alas, I have been off of caffeine for the last 6 months or so. I've been trying to give my body a rest and recover and get my nervous system back to a point where it's not always thinking it's getting chased by a lion. So what I've been doing is I've been using their adaptogen powder, which has 10 different mushrooms, roots, leaves, berries, and superfoods, with their mushroom blend that has another 10 different types of mushrooms every day for the last 6 months or so. And I've actually personally seen a huge improvement in my HRV, stress levels, recovery, etc. If I'm facing down a really big work day, I actually added an extra packet of both their lion's mane and cordyceps and mix all of that together with a scoop of very exogenous ketones, and it lights my brain up like nothing else can. I've asked the team at Four Sigmatic to hook you guys up, and so they're giving all listeners of the Natural State Podcast 15% off your Four Sigmatic order. Just go to foursigmatic.com/AG15 or enter code AG15, that's AG15 at checkout. That is foursigmatic.com/AG15 to receive 15% off your order. This show is also brought to you by Blue Blocks, blue light blocking glasses. Blue light is one of these things that a lot of people do not realize is completely trashing their sleep. So this is verified, at least for me. I've looked at my Oura Ring, and anytime I get blue light exposure from devices past, say, 4 p.m., the latency, the time it takes for me to fall asleep, as well as my deep sleep, are completely diminished. And when I wear glasses like Blue Blocks, it completely reverses that, and I can get a full rested sleep with no problem. There are a lot of brands out there right now that are trying to get on this trend of blocking blue light for good reason. And what happens is most of them are either really cheap and they break super easily, they are terrible looking and make you look like a freaking goon, or they actually just don't work. So I've tried some out that, are sort of a spectrum of any of these things, all the way to being so dark that I get headaches from wearing them. And what I like about Blue Blocks is it sort of addresses all of these things. So they're made actually in Australia, really, really high quality stuff. They have 20 plus different styles of each one. So no matter what sort of style fits your head and your face, my face is sometimes a little tough to make look good. So I'm glad they have options for me. But also they test all of their lenses to make sure that they meet specific criteria to block very specific wavelengths of light. And this is the important part here. Not a lot of brands do this. And so I've actually tested theirs side by side. I mean, you can do this as easily as just looking at a spectrum of blue, and you put on their glasses and you can't see the blue anymore. It goes completely black, or it has a shade of a gray. And this is what you want. And these guys who have done this company have done a phenomenal job at really sourcing the highest quality lenses, highest quality frames, and the ones that actually look good. So I'm not embarrassed when I put these on in public. And I asked them if they could hook you guys up, and they obliged. So 15% off is yours if you use code AG15. Also, you get free shipping. So if you want to, just head to BLUBLOX.com and use code AG15. That's blueblocks.com. Use code AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. Ben, welcome.
Hey, Anthony, what's up? I'm supposed to be in Austin with you right now.
Yeah, we're supposed to do this in person, but yeah.
But apparently the planes are all shut down, or at least I'm not supposed to be on them.
The world had a different plan for us today.
I guess so, dude. I guess so. You know, really, I don't mind not being in the same room with you. What I really mind is that I didn't get a chance to eat barbecue this weekend like I planned on.
Do you have any favorites here?
There's that place across the street from where they have Paleo FX.
At Terry Black's.
Yeah, Terry Black's. You know, honestly, I don't know if that's like regeneratively farmed, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, but their brisket is so good. I'm willing to sacrifice the health of my GI tract and potentially come down with full-blown colon cancer in exchange for that mouth-watering goodness. Yeah, so I'll take it.
Some barbecue is worth it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You still planning to come out in July if they redo it?
Well, I'm supposed to speak in Amsterdam at that Mind Valley University thing. However, I'm not sure. I have enjoyed so much the past few weeks not being on airplanes and not being in airports, particularly not doing long haul international travel, that at this point Austin seems a little bit more appealing to me than Amsterdam. Although I guess I can't really just like pop a blotter of LSD and smoke weed in a coffee shop in Austin like I could in Amsterdam.
Well, kind of. I mean, no one's really going to bother you.
I could, but there'll be more people judging.
So yeah, I mean, you obviously travel more than most people that I know of. And how have you been enjoying time, not having to go through airports, be on planes, mess up your routine, change time zones, et cetera?
Honestly, I think it's affected my body. It's not to get too woo, but I think it's affected my body's electricity, like the health of my mitochondria, my overall electrical balance, just not being so disconnected from the planet, so disconnected from sunlight, so disconnected from circadian rhythmicity, so disconnected from, chlorophyll-rich plant compounds and, really good food. It's like being stuck at home for 30 days now. Pretty much not a drop of vegetable oil. Right. Every single day outside in the sunshine, every single day, love and relationships with the family. Plus I happen to live in a place where I've got, a hyperbaric chamber and a sauna and a biocharger and all these Juve panels, all this crazy stuff that usually I used to kind of like fix all the shit that goes south when I'm traveling. And now I've just been using it to optimize my body. And I mean, like, I'm feeling more and more amazing as every day goes by. So I could live with this.
Yeah. Are you noticing anything like quantifiably improve as far as HRV, sleep, anything like that? Or is it mostly subjective?
My HRV is through the roof. Now, I'm not sleeping as much. I'm sleeping like maybe 6.5 hours a night. And it's like my eyes open about 4:30, 5-ish. And I crush the day. And like with full energy all day long. So I think, I'm also just getting by on less sleep because my body, just it's optimized. So
it's amazing.
So, yeah.
Has your routine changed much as far as that goes? Or, I mean, you're a pretty routine driven guy. I mean, is it?
Yeah, particularly I tend to, I just finished my Russian kettlebell certification and was doing a lot of kind of concurrent strength and endurance training, prior to that doing a lot of Spartan races and, a lot of relatively inflammatory, training. not overtraining, but, beating up the body, and with mildly masochistic workouts on a near daily basis. And I really shortened or eliminated most of those type of activities, replaced that with a pretty brief, like 15 to 30 minute daily workout. That's kind of like more body weight training or blood flow restriction training. And blood flow restriction is really interesting because you can still get mitochondrial biogenesis and satellite cell proliferation. You can build muscle, but it's via a different pathway because you're not creating inflammation. It's instead just based on the fact that when you apply tourniquets or these so-called BFR bands or Katsu bands to your upper arms or upper legs, and you do a training session, you're trapping lactic acid in the tissue and inducing a temporary state of hypoxia, and the muscles are essentially fooled into thinking they're being damaged under heavy load, even though they aren't. And they respond very similarly to the way that they'd respond with heavy anaerobic training or resistance training. And so my logic there is I'm just trying not to contribute to any type of inflammation or excess cytokine production that might be aggravated by exposure to a virus. And I've replaced a lot of that hard training, aside from the body weight training and the BFR training, with just a ton of breath work, sauna, and cold. And I'm taking my boys through, I'm just using this opportunity where I'm at home for weeks and weeks to teach my boys Wim Hof and intermittent hypoxia and holotropic breath work. Yep. CO2 retention, O2 and CO2 apnea tables. And we're doing almost all that in the sauna. So we're getting, nitric oxide and heat shock proteins and kind of amplifying our immune system. We're doing a lot of deep nasal breathing. All of that's fantastic for stress. They've been sleeping like babies because they're so tired after all of our breath work and heat and cold in the evenings. They just kind of eat dinner and go fall asleep. But yeah, I've kind of changed up my routine in that my evenings involve a lot more breath work, heat, and cold rather than hard training.
Interesting. So with the blood flow restriction training, I've had a few people tell me that I need to get into this and start doing this. And so the question I have is, obviously you're doing this tourniqueting your arms and your upper arm and your thigh, right?
Yeah. So in the traditional form of VFR training, which was developed by a Japanese guy named Dr. Sato, typically you'd tourniquet just the arms or just the legs and do a series of sets for the upper body, typically with minimal rest, like 20 to 30 seconds between sets. And his classic Katsu training that they've done most of the research on involves pyramiding, meaning you do a set of, let's say you tourniquet your legs and you're going to do body weight squats or light, say kettlebell goblet squats or squats, back squats, but with just the barbell. You do a set of, say, 40 to 50 reps, so pretty high rep set, recover 30 seconds, do a set of 20 to 30 reps, recover 30 seconds. And typically within the course of about 3 to 5 sets, you get to the point where you can only do 5 reps, and then you just move on to the next exercise. And typically, in his style of training, you would do that type of tourniqueted workout for the legs for about 15 minutes. And then at a different time of day or directly afterwards, do something similar with the arms, same type of pyramid scheme. And since he developed that style of program, which again in Japan is known as Katsu training and is kind of the gold standard that has since been a little bit bastardized by all these Amazon websites selling, cheap bands that work a little differently. The cheap bands work, but they limit both venous and arterial flow. And the Katsu pneumatic bands that they use in Japan just limit the venous flow while still allowing for good arterial flow. So you're not completely occluding blood flow to the muscle, but the blood that does arrive in the muscle gets kind of trapped there. And so the Katsu training is supposedly more effective and a little bit safer than these, say, BFR bands that you can buy on Amazon, but they're also much more expensive. Now, since Dr. Sato has started to partner with Olympic committees and some professional sports teams, they're now doing a lot more kind of like full body training where you might tourniquet the arms and the legs and do a swim workout or an airdyne workout or something like that. But For that, you just need to ensure it's in a healthy population, because there is risk of fainting due to the amount of blood flow restriction. So if you tourniquet both your arms and your legs, it's harder. I find it to be more effective, but you just have to be careful. Like I'll get dizzy if I'm not careful, and if you're in a standing position, you want to pass out and break your nose, especially these days, because the last place you want to wind up is a hospital right now. Right. But so what I'll typically do, just because I like to squeeze as much into a short period of time as possible, is I'll, for example, tourniquet the arms, tourniquet the legs, and then do a set of 30 squats, 20 push-ups, 10 pull-ups, 2 minutes on the Airdyne, and just do like an AMRAP for like 20 minutes.
And then is there a crossover effect from where you're locking down these tissues? So you're saying that the backup of lactic acid, does that go back in your bloodstream? And for instance, like if you're just at your deltoid / bicep insertion, if you're, at the arm, for example, is that going to go through and then affect lats and pecs and all these other muscle groups? Have they done studies on that, or is it just locally whatever's restricted? Yeah,
it's just going to be local, but most notably, the neuroendocrine response in terms of the growth hormone and testosterone response post-workout is pretty compelling. And in addition, there's a massive surge in vascular endothelial growth factor, in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and in nitric oxide. So you get this really cool, like, feel-good effect in the brain. You get better blood flow, and then the acidic nature of the muscles during the training, combined with the hypoxia again, is what induces a hypertrophic response and also a mitochondrial response, even in the absence of something as hard as would normally be required to cause that response. And so, this is also why it's been shown to be a wonderful form of training for like seniors who might not be able to handle heavy loads. And it's been shown to stave off both sarcopenia and osteopenia in seniors who use blood flow restriction training.
Okay. And then as far as things that you've noticed personally, I mean, you're already a pretty shredded dude. So, I mean, have you noticed anything, other than feeling like subjective measures?
I have not been lifting heavy, and I have not lost a shred of muscle. Wow. And what I'm doing is just, again, those super quick 15 to 20 minute BFR. Granted, I'm doing it every day. And that's the cool thing is you can train, and Dr. Sato will even train sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, with almost like, what do you call them, like micro workouts, right? Where you might do a session for the arms, a session for the legs, and a session for the core, once in the morning, once in the midday, and once in the evening. And because there's not a lot of muscle damage that occurs, you can just you bounce back super quickly. So there's lower risk for overtraining. And, especially these days when a lot of people are stuck at home and may not have access to heavy weights or a decent home gym, just your body and maybe a pull-up bar and a good pair of blood flow restriction bands or the Katsu pneumatic devices. And you can make a lot happen. The other cool thing is, the sky's the limit. You can go on walks, right, with your legs tourniqueted and get a really cool training effect for the legs. You can, go to a normal sauna session or a yoga session. And excuse me, I'm not financially affiliated with Katsu at all, but they even recommend, for like office workers who are just at their desks working, you can put on the Katsu bands, and if you get these fancier Japanese pneumatic devices, they're controlled by a hand controller. And so you can literally just push the hand controller and set it up in cycle mode while you're working at your office for, let's say you're going to go through emails for an hour, and it will cycle from like 0 millimeters of mercury up to 400 and back down, and kind of like constrict and relax and constrict and relax. So they can be used, as a way to just kind of like act as an external heart and pump and restrict blood as you're just working. So
yeah,
there's a lot of cool uses.
The biggest problem of not just standing, but sitting, just being sedentary in general, is just lack of blood flow from not moving your tissues.
Right.
So, before sort of quarantine time, were your kids at school, or did you have them at home, homeschool anyways? Has that changed at all?
We got lucky. They've been not homeschooling, but they unschool, meaning that they pretty much learn through life-based experiences, field trips, building tree forts, playing outside, finding new plants and insects, working out, doing breath work, heat and cold with dad. And the only thing that's really changed is that because they were, for some things, they would have like a tutor coming over to the house, or, they would go to the local museum or the library. They are doing just a little bit more kind of like traditional homeschooling-esque kitchen table book work, just because, at least where we're at in Spokane, people are being heavily encouraged to stay home. And so, they don't have like their Spanish tutor coming over a few times a week, and they don't have the ability to go to a lot of museums and libraries. So they're doing a little bit more work at home. But the cool thing is, a lot of their tutors they're working with, they've just switched to working with them via Zoom. And then and then we're just, like they used to go to tennis and they used to go to jiu-jitsu, and, now they've got a jiu-jitsu guy that just comes up to the house a few times a week and rolls with them in the garage. And then for tennis, we set up a ping pong table, and we just, when they normally be at tennis, we just have little ping pong tournaments at home, so they still maintain that hand-eye coordination and some of the racket skills. And so, yeah, we've had to adapt a little bit, but probably not as much as we would have had to had they been in a traditional school.
Did you and your wife come up with the schooling program and the curriculum, or is this something that there was a template and you guys sort of borrowed from and made that? Because it sounds pretty amazing.
We had to kind of create our own, because unschooling, there is no perfect program. It's basically listening to what your child's passions and interests are and what they express and how those interests change as they proceed through life, and then surrounding them with as many tools and books and games and tutors and projects and activities that fuel those passions and those interests. However, there's also, based on the requirements of most states, at least in America, requirements for a child to show proficiency in certain knowledge areas. Like in Washington, it's 12 different subjects: math, social studies, reading, writing, occupational interests, etc. So what we do is we have one virtual assistant who kind of like manages everything in an Excel spreadsheet, and the boys keep journals every day of everything they do. They scan those and send them to her, and then she kind of figures out what fits into each category. Mom and I do quarterly assessments of anything we've taught the boys. Like mom does things like, cooking and sewing and gardening. And I'm teaching, things like fasting, meditation, breath work, kettlebells, cold pool. I'm kind of primarily focusing on teaching them the physical and the spiritual disciplines. She's doing a lot more of the homemaking, gardening. We have goats and chickens, so they do a lot of kind of animal husbandry type of work. And then all the tutors also send over their worksheets over to our kind of like head educational assistant who works virtually. And then she takes all of that and keeps all the records. And then she also takes anything that the boys are interested in, like let's say a computer programming course, or they're building drones right now and learning how to use drones and cameras together. And she'll actually figure out which block of the year that's going to fit best into, so that we're not doing too much at once, right? So if the boys are like, Dad, I really, really want to, I want to learn woodworking, and I also want to learn how to use computers with woodworking, which would be, the use of something like Google SketchUp and, some other programs that they might, be doing on the computer, and then some garage work. But we've got, 10 other things we're doing at the time. She'll say, okay, July till September of this year, that's going to be a block where they're going to have a lot of woodworking skills. And so she kind of helps with the curriculum. And then we also have another assistant who lives here locally who helps to like drive them to some of their different activities, who meets with them typically on a daily basis, just go over their weekly whiteboard and make sure that they're going through each of the activities of the day that they have planned. And so it's a group effort between mom and I, and then a virtual assistant, and then kind of like a local lady. And then probably the best resource that I found was a book called Unschooling to University by Judy Arnall, who I actually interviewed on my podcast. And it's a pretty good resource for kind of like the K through 12 approach of unschooling that still also would allow a child, should they decide to be able to go to university, which I don't necessarily think is a must. But, if your kid wants to be a surgeon or an astronaut or something else that might require formal training, it's a good idea. So that Unschooling University book is probably the best example of something that kind of gives you all the tools that you need to then sit down and create your own program based around what your kid is interested in.
Yeah, interesting. So they still have to pass tests as well, like aptitude tests throughout certain grades, or how does that work?
No, not if we do those quarterly assessments. They actually don't have to do the standardized testing. So there's kind of a few different ways to skin the cat.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I sort of, think about having kids in the next couple of years. I want to pay you guys to sort of host a summer camp. So you just like come out and see what's going on and how you guys are doing this. Cause it's like it's a really unconventional. I'm like sort of faced with a lot of these questions of, how are we going to raise kids? Like I'm not obviously a big fan of school, but yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got it figured out.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I have it figured out. I'm just trying to stay one step ahead of them. Right.
It's amazing. Do you guys limit many devices or anything like that? Or how do you allow that to come into their life and use technology without letting it consume them like most other people?
Oh, no, we don't limit anything. Like our kids can have as much sugar as they want. They can have as much gluten as they want. They can open up the alcohol cabinet and get drunk if they want to see what that's like. And we pretty much just
dip in your mushroom stash.
Yeah, we educate them on the consequences of any decision that they make. And we try to do a really good job setting up an example for them and then let them make the decision. So like at our house, when there's downtime, Mom and I have our nose in a book, or I'm playing the guitar, or we're out gardening or going on a walk. We're very rarely just like glued to our phones. And, we really don't have a video gaming system. We have a TV. It's rarely on because Mom and I just don't watch movies or Netflix or anything. So the boys haven't really grown up in an environment where screens are the holy grail that I think they are in a lot of households. So that's part of it. And then, I've also had discussions with them about the impact of, they both have an eye touch because they have a podcast. They have a cooking podcast. That's their business. It's called the Go Greenfield Show. And so every week they do an episode on whatever plant foraging or cooking, or they'll interview a chef or do a restaurant review. And so they both have an eye touch, and they both have a MacBook that they not only use for school, but also for recording and uploading their podcast. And, I've shown them, okay, so here when you're using your eye touch, here's how to put it in airplane mode. If you have the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi on and it's down by your crotch, I'll tell them about how it impacts sperm production later in life and could affect the health of not just them, but their children. And we talk about the impact on the brain, and we talk about the impact of screens on circadian rhythms. So if they do, like the other night, because we're home a lot more, they wanted to watch a movie. And we said we were going to have a special family movie night. So we watched a movie, but they go and they get their little blue light blocking glasses, and and they're aware of the effects of some of this stuff on circadian rhythmicity. But I don't tell them, you have to put on your glasses. I wear mine, and I tell them about the impact of blue light on sleep, then let them make the decision, because I don't want to set up some kind of forbidden fruit where you're not allowed to use your eye touch between the hours of 8 and 10 p.m. Well, the first thing they're going to want to do is use their eye touch, sneak off and try to use it between 8 and 10 p.m., or at least there's a greater propensity for that. Or you can't have any cake at your friend's birthday party. I instead just educate them about the effects of gluten, and I'll even give them dipeptidyl peptidase or some kind of gluten digesting enzyme that they could use if they want to, and then let them make the decision. So no, there's really no limits on screen time or anything like that in our house. We just educate them on the consequences of their decisions, and then try to set a good example ourselves.
Yeah. And then when there's not a quarantine going on because of the pandemic, do you guys do sort of plan socializing with other kids their age and kids, around their age? Yeah,
that would be like tennis, jiu-jitsu, trips to the local museum. Even though they're not homeschooled per se, there's a lot of local group homeschooling activities, like, Friday night day at the trampoline park. And they have friends over a lot to play. Other kids in the community who are homeschooled will come over during the day, and they'll go, play around on the obstacle course, or, go swimming in the pool. They see kids quite a bit. They see other kids quite a bit. That's actually the one thing that's most annoying to me about this quarantine is, I can get by for a pretty long time without seeing people. because I'm pretty introverted. Plus, I'm having discussions with guys like you, doing podcasts all the time, texting folks, doing Zoom calls. But, for kids, I think, just having other children to play with is pretty important. And so that's been the one thing. And they're still, having some Zoom calls with their cousins and their friends and things like that. But I still feel bad about that, about them not being able to just be with friends or be with family. They are missing that, and I can tell.
How are you seeing them take to breath work?
Oh, they're crushing it. It's amazing. I wish that I had learned how to use my breath, how to use my prana to control my physiology and my stress and to activate my sympathetic nervous system via something like a Wim Hof protocol, followed by a quick cold soak or cold plunge, or learned how to do like 4-8 breathing or intranasal breathing or box breathing at night to lull myself to sleep instead of taking, a handful of pills and supplements. And I'm training them in all that. And it's amazing just to see them become aware of how they can tweak their physiology through breath work. And so, for example, we have this giant ice tub right outside my office that they've never really messed around with. They've just always thought it looked uncomfortable. And now they know that they're like, oh, I can stand in front of this thing. I can do 3 rounds of Wim Hof. And we've been doing this, and so they're sitting in that tub like little ninjas for like 3 minutes now. And, then they get out and they go take a shower and we go gather for dinner. And it's just cool to see them learning that. It's cool to see them learn that, when you breathe through your nose, you get more nitric oxide, you retain more CO2, you warm and humidify and filter the air, and you do more deep belly diaphragmatic breathing. And so they place both hands on their belly and they learn how to breathe through their nose. So it changes their breathing patterns. Of course, we know that it also changes, especially for a child, nasal congestion can affect the formation of the teeth, crowding of the teeth, the necessity for removal of wisdom teeth, the, sleep quality due to the potential for sleep apnea due to mouth breathing. And so for them to be learning these skills early in life and to be able to use the free built-in stress reduction mechanism that's inside of all of us at that age, for me, it's like, pinch me now. This is amazing because, I now have this dedicated time at home where I can teach them all these things I've been wanting to teach them.
Yeah, it's amazing. So how would you categorize different breathing as far as how you view it? There's just so many different forms popping up now and so many people claiming different things. I mean, do you sort of think about it as far as ones to activate, ones to deactivate nervous system? And how do you separate them?
Yeah, you're right. There's there's like the Wim Hof breathing, and I know the XPT organization recently launched their app, and they do a lot of breath work. And then, of course, you have the ancient prana techniques from yoga. And then another guy who I really like has one called Soma breath work, which is actually the course I'm primarily taking my kids through, along with some Wim Hof and a few other little meditations thrown in. But I just mostly to really simplify it, I look at it as activating breath work and deactivating breath work, right? Like stress reduction breath work and an activation breath work where you're trying to activate the sympathetic nervous system. And I would classify, something like Wim Hof breath work, the blowing off of CO2, the tingling that you get, the DMT release, and the longer breath hold times and the absence of CO2 as something that is more performance-based. It's really not longevity or health-based because we know that it's actually it's almost like the Patrick McKeown or the Anders Olsen, 2 really good breathwork authors who have both written good books on breathwork. That, Patrick McKeown was the oxygen advantage, and I think Anders Olsen was the power of breath or something like that. But, they teach CO2 retention and minimal breathing and very light breathing through the nose and long exhales. And we know if you look at mammals like the bowhead whale or the naked mole rat, that there's a direct longevity effect and a decrease in the rate of telomere shortening when you have a higher amount of CO2 tolerance. And part of that might be because of what in physiology we call the Bohr effect, where when you have simultaneously elevated levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide, oxygen more readily dissociates from hemoglobin into muscle tissue or into organ tissues. And so you do a better job oxygenating the body. And when you blow off all that CO2, it kind of like activates you and activates the sympathetic nervous system a little bit more. It could be used to fight off a pathogen like E. coli, like Wim Hof did, or could be used before a workout or a race. But that's kind of the opposite of more of the health, longevity, deactivation, parasympathetic breath work. So really it comes down to how vigorously are you breathing and how much CO2 are you blowing off. And if you're breathing vigorously and blowing off CO2, that's more kind of like performance-based breath work. And if you're breathing a little bit more lightly, exhaling for a longer period of time and retaining CO2, that would be more like parasympathetic, longevity, health-based breath work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then are you using these strategically at any other times in your day? Other than obviously for the use cases, but it's like before dinner, after dinner, before workouts, after workouts, like right when you wake up, before you go to bed?
Yeah, for us right now, it has been, for me, I do a morning breathwork session, typically while the water is heating for coffee. I actually have like a trampoline downstairs, and I'll jump up and down on the trampoline and do some kind of Wim Hof-esque type of breath work, and some breath holds, some holds on exhale, some holds on inhale. I combine that with some foam rolling and just kind of charge up my body for the day. And then around the mid-afternoon, I will sometimes take a nap. And so I'll nap for like 20 minutes or so. I have this app that I use called New Calm. It's amazing. It allows you to almost simulate a full sleep cycle with about 20 minutes of playing these tracks on the New Calm.
This kind of similar to that. New Calm?
Yeah, similar to that would be like you could look up some free tracks online, like on YouTube, called Yoga Nidra, and Yoga Nidra would be like the less technologically advanced way to do this. But I'm talking about like 20 to 30 minutes of just getting your body into a deep state of relaxation without having to spend a long period of time just like passed out in the afternoon. And so I'll drop in typically for a quick 20 to 30 minutes of relaxation, but then I'll finish that with more activating breath work. Like there's one protocol I like. Again, I download a lot of these off YouTube and then just keep them on my phone and play them through some good noise blocking headphones. But there's one that's like a 10-minute DMT release protocol. So I'll nap and then I'll wake up and it'll be like, and it'll get faster as it goes. So by the end, and then at the end, you suck all the air in, you squeeze your pelvis, you send all the energy right out the crown chakra, hold, and it just charges up the body. It's like a cup of coffee for your body. So I'll wake to that, and then I'm charged up for the rest of the afternoon. And then, like I mentioned, in the later afternoon or the early evening, when I'd normally be doing a hard workout, I'm instead doing a quick workout and then dropping in for typically what would be a more relaxing session before dinner with the boys. And we always finish with cold. And what we do is we do the breath work for 20, sometimes up to 40 minutes in the sauna. And so we're just dripping the sweat. And then we kind of tiptoe out to the cold pool. We try and maintain the sense of peacefulness and parasympathetically activated state. And we slip really quietly into the cold pool, right? And we'll spend like 2 to 5 minutes in there just doing some box breathing or some deep breathing. And then the rule is everybody goes and gets ready for dinner, but we kind of stay quiet. We stay in our own heads. And so then when we arrive at dinner, it's like everybody's just super chill. And then, we'll typically before dinner, we'll sing a song, we'll say a prayer, we'll do some gratefulness, and we'll have dinner. And it's way better than everybody just like, amping up to the dinner table after tennis and jiu-jitsu and everything else, stuff in our faces. Like it's a very mindful way to approach the evening. So that's the way that we've been doing it.
Yeah, I love that mindful approach to, I'm sure even digestion is drastically impaired. I'm sure you feel.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been trying to get into this year and last 6 months or so in sort of a scientific way that's been challenging. And you said earlier, like, oh, it's sort of woo to talk about energy, and you're saying like send this stuff up through chakra, et cetera, is just the intention of energy throughout the body and like controlling it and guiding it into certain places. It sounds like you're pretty experienced in this stuff. Like what have you found to be either resources or techniques to like demystify this whole, yogic approach to energy and controlling your inner state?
I wouldn't say that there's a good program that demystifies it, because a lot of this, kind of like acupuncture, is working on some energy fields that cannot be seen or measured very well, aside from something like an indirect measurement of, let's say, heart rate variability to assess how it might be affecting vagal nerve tone or the sinoatrial node of the heart, right? So you can do some amount of electrical measurement via something like HRV, and if you had access to a good lab, lab, you could do like, plasma or salivary cortisol levels. But ultimately, what I think are some of the better resources and some of the better applications would be, like I mentioned, there's a guy I interviewed he calls himself the Renegade Pharmacist. He's one of like Wim Hof's master instructors, but he has his own flavor of breathwork called Soma. And I interviewed him, and he has a whole 21-day course that's pretty good, that works you through everything from CO2 retention to different forms of meditation to holotropic breath work. And so that one's pretty good. There's a brand new book called Breathe by James Nestor, which is excellent, and especially gets into that CO2 thing I was talking about, and even the fact that they're now using inhaled CO2 therapy for people with PTSD, stress, anxiety, etc. Literally like blasting them with CO2 via like a nasal inhaler. I don't know if it's a nasal inhaler or a nebulizer or what, but that new book is really good. And his previous book on free diving got into how when you go deep into the water, you get this splenic compression. And that's why a lot of Olympic athletes are now, even if they're not competing in diving or spearfishing, using like deep water immersion and free diving, because it's almost like legal blood doping, kind of like a sauna is, right? We know that post-workout long sauna sessions increase erythropoietin and red blood cell production. Going deep underwater, like 20 plus feet, does the same thing. And so James Nestor, his book on free diving, which I forget the title of, would be very easy to find on Google or Amazon, and then his new book, Breathe. Those are really good resources. And then finally, I would say for you guys out there, this idea of locking energy, right? For example, sending all this energy that you've breathed up into your body, locking your pelvis and sending it out the top of your head and up into your brain instead. That's basically tantric sex, right? That's how you achieve the ability to be able to multi-orgasm, or to be able to have sex for hours and hours without actually ejaculating, but still orgasming. And there's a really good book called The Multi-Orgasmic Male. I forget who wrote it, but that book teaches you how to take a lot of these concepts and then carry them forward into something like sex.
Yeah, I think David Data writes some good stuff about this as well.
Yeah. Finding God in sex.
Yeah, this is some stuff that I thought was absolute bullshit as well. And I know you have a chapter in your new book about sex as well, and not orgasming as a man is a really interesting way to retain energy. Is this something you toyed around with for a while? For about 2.5 years. I read The Multi-Orgasmic Male. I tried like the zero ejaculation thing for about 30 days, started to mess around with the breath work. And really for me, from a practical standpoint, I'm not like a sex marathon kind of guy. My wife and I aren't, making love for 6 hours and waking up bleary eyed in the morning because we went to bed at 2 a.m. But I do like to have sex. And for the first couple of times that I'm about to come, instead squeezing my pelvis, very similar to the Kegel exercise, doing the breath lock, breathing it all up to my head and holding, and you get that same release without the ejaculate. And then, I don't like to not come during sex. So, once I've done a few rounds of that and I feel really good, then I'll finish up and ejaculate. But, for me, it's just like throwing a few little bonus orgasms into sex. Like that's where I found the best use of it. Yeah. David Data also has in the book called Enlightened Sex Manual. It goes over a lot of this stuff. It's sort of interesting. I thought it was bullshit until I read it and tried some of the stuff in it. Big fan.
Yeah.
Just switching gears a little bit, has your nutrition changed at all since this stay-at-home order, or pretty much same as this?
There was one morning where I didn't feel so hot, and it was because we decided to support the local community and use Uber Eats for food delivery from one of our favorite restaurants. But inevitably, sauces, dressings, the source of the meat, etc. You're getting seed oils, you're getting some rancid and oxidized oils. You're typically getting, depending on the food source, kind of like a more compromised meat, whether it's antibiotics or hormones or more arachidonic acid or inflammatory components or whatever. And, being in almost like 100% in control of food has been amazing, meaning that, we have 8 raised vegetable garden beds. We've got goats for goat milk. We have chickens for eggs. We have all the meat I've hunted, and then also the meat I get from places like U.S. Wellness Meats and Belcampo and some of these other places where I'll get things like organ meats and bone broths. And then my wife does a lot of fermenting of a lot of the spring and summer vegetables. So we got a whole refrigerator full of, fermented beets and pickles and sauerkrauts and kimchis. And then I personally do a lot of yogurts. So I make a lot of goat milk yogurt. I make a lot of kefir, and I make a lot of coconut milk yogurt. And so I've typically got a few glass mason jars of these wonderful yogurt-based ferments in the fridge. And then one thing I changed recently, just because of a little bit more time at home as part of this quarantine, was I started sprouting seeds. So I've got a whole bottom section of the pantry with glass mason jars where I'm sprouting alfalfa and red clover and broccoli. And these are amazing to dress up a salad or to toss in a smoothie, because you're deactivating a lot of the built-in plant defense mechanisms via the process of sprouting, which takes 4 to 5 days. And then you're also getting some really, really nutrient dense and dirt cheap grains. And I even use a food dehydrator, and I'll take a lot of the sprouts and just lay them out in a food dehydrator and turn them into this crunchy, almost like kale chip type of snack that I'll put sea salt on. And so yeah, one thing that's changed, I've done a lot more sprouting, stepped up the yogurt game, and then I'm just experimenting with new recipes. Like last night, I've always wanted to figure out how to make raw cakes, right? Sometimes I'll go to coffee shops and they have these like fantastic raw cakes made with, almonds and cashews and, coconut flakes and blueberries. And so last night, I, after soaking for a day some baruca nuts and cashews, and then, rinsing multiple times the water, so I get rid of a lot of the lectins and the phytic acids and some of the other issues in the nuts. I blend that up with things like stevia and coconut oil. I had some really good dark organic blueberry powder, and that's like my cake filling. And then for my crust, I used coconut flour and ground flaxseed, a little bit more coconut oil, some salt, some monk fruit extract, and then just put that in a cheesecake pan and, put the filling in. And then I top that with goji berries and coconut flakes and some chocolate nut butter that I made. And that's actually what I had for breakfast this morning, And so yeah, a little bit more time to just be at home making recipes and doing a lot more sprouting, doing a lot more fermenting. Jess is doing a lot more gardening. And should this quarantine go on for a very long period of time, I'm still shooting my bow every day in case I got to pick off a few whitetail or something like that and get a little bit extra meat in the fridge, because there's a lot of whitetail and a lot of turkey out right now. So yeah, just the main thing that's changed is just less bastardization of a really good diet with occasional forays to restaurants or trying to get through airplanes or airports or being at dinners at conferences, with your dinner roll and your iceberg lettuce salad. And so, yeah, it's pretty much like every meal except that one meal that we ordered in via Uber Eats has been incredibly dialed in. And and my gut also feels just absolutely fantastic. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah. How are you making the yogurt? Are you doing it in the oven, or are you doing it in a yogurt maker? What's your protocol there?
Well, I have a few different yogurt recipes, so I'll share a couple of them with you. One is based on the idea that high amounts of glycine via like a gelatinous delivery mechanism, very similar to Jell-O, can actually be one of the best nighttime snacks to satiate the appetite with very few calories, to give you some good amino acids as you fall asleep. And, I find that I can go to bed not feeling hungry, but also without having eaten a huge meal before bed if I have some of this coconut yogurt Jell-O that I make. And the way that I make that is I'll take a couple cans of like BPA-free canned coconut milk, and I'll put that in a ceramic bowl. And then I stir into that a little bit of prebiotic fiber, a little bit of like a teaspoon of sugar for the bacteria to feed on, and typically a little bit of stevia for sweetener. And then I'll break open different probiotic capsules. One of my favorites is a strain of L. reuteri, because that's been shown to induce an oxytocin release, and it has a really cool kind of feel-good effect, and also helps to support sleep. And then I'll just stir all that mix together with a fork, and I put that in the food dehydrator at about 110 degrees. An oven would work, or a yogurt maker, for about 24 hours. And then when it comes out and it's kind of warm, I stir a bunch of the Great Lakes gelatin in, and then I just put that in the refrigerator. It takes a couple hours to set, and I've basically got coconut yogurt jello. So that's one that I really like to make. That's typically what I'll have like after dinner as a snack, just because again, like it's amazing for sleep. Another one that I do is I have a really, really expensive probiotic that I bought based on the clotho protein, which appears to do a really good job at limiting DNA damage, and also at, again, decreasing the rate at which telomeres shorten. And there's a company called Immortalis who developed a probiotic strain mixed with vitamin D and some different bacteria that support the formation of this clotho protein. But the problem is it's like $2,000 for a bottle of these capsules, and there's like 30 capsules. So I have a bottle, and I've just been growing the strain myself in goat's milk. And so because the proteins and some of the microbes in the goat's milk can degrade the bacteria, I heat the goat's milk, I boil it, and then once it's returned to room temperature, I break open a few of these capsules into it, and then I put that into a yogurt maker, and then I put stir olive oil into it, because the lipid layer that the olive oil forms on top is actually kind of protective to this bacteria. And it's actually the oleic acid in the oil actually enhances the growth of the bacteria. And I'm a little bit foggy as to the mechanism, but I talked to one of the researchers who formulated this probiotic strain. He highly recommends blending it in olive oil. And so I do that with goat's milk yogurt and olive oil in this probiotic strain called Immortalis, which you could probably just Google and find. And that's another yogurt that I make. That's Jessica calls it my $2,000 yogurt, because I'm like, you realize if we had to buy this like at Erewhon, it'd be like a month's paycheck. So I'm figuring out a way to go through that bottle very slowly by just turning it all into yogurt. And then let me think if there's any other good ones that I do. Probably the last one would be kefir. So you can get kefir grains, and what I do is I always have a kefir strainer on the kitchen counter, and I pour goat's milk over the kefir grains, and I stir some colostrum in there, which helps to support the growth of the kefir grains, and I let that sit for about 24 hours, and then I pour out the end result, which is kefir, which is fantastic for the gut, and actually results in the release of peptides in gut tissue, and so you get a real gut healing effect as well. And it's really supportive for neurotransmitter function and for mental health also. And what I'll do is I'll pour out that kefir that I fermented, put that in a glass mason jar and put it in the fridge, and use that kefir as a base for smoothies that I might make in the morning. And then I'll just pour more goat's milk on top of the kefir grains that I've strained, add more colostrum, sometimes add a little bit of prebiotic fiber, and then just rinse, wash, and repeat. So I've always got a batch of kefir going on the counter.
Amazing. And then as far as that morning smoothie, anything different you're tweaking out with that? I think you're always trying to find new ways to make it incredible.
It's not really a smoothie. It's more like a bowl. So what I do is, like the acai bowls that you eat with a spoon, I like to make my smoothies like that, because I find I savor it a lot more, and, the digestive enzymes in your mouth can kind of go to work on what you have in it. So typically, over a bunch of ice that is in a blender, I'll pour a little bit of that kefir, typically about like half kefir, half bone broth. I'll put in some Ceylon cinnamon, typically a little bit of monk fruit or stevia, a couple scoops of a good protein powder, and a little bit of colostrum, a little bit of a greens powder, and then I'll blend that up. And then once I blend it to a really thick consistency, almost like ice cream, right? And so then I'll use a big spatula and spoon that into a bowl, right? So it looks just like an acai bowl, and then I top it with things like unsweetened coconut flakes, chlorella, spirulina, some nut butter, some sea salt, and so it's literally like having an amazing acai bowl in the morning. And I really don't eat an appreciable amount of carbs at all until the evening. I really only have one carbohydrate feeding of around 100 to 150 grams a day, and that's usually in the evening. And then I typically eat pretty low carb the rest of the day. So I kind of do like a cyclic keto or carb cycling type of approach. And that morning smoothie tastes amazing, but because the sweetness is primarily derived from stevia and monk fruit, aside from even the kefir, because those kefir grains digest a lot of the lactose sugars. I would say maybe there's like 5 to 10 grams max of carbs in that morning smoothie, but it tastes like ice cream. It's amazing.
Did you ever, I know Paul was trying to get you carnivore for a while. Did you ever do an experiment?
Yeah, I did it for 12 weeks and felt great. I did a full nose to tail carnivore diet. I threw in a little honey, threw in some berries, and occasionally would have some underground storage organs like some pumpkin or summer squash or winter squash, occasionally a little bit of carrot and parsnip, but primarily, ribeye, liver, kidney, heart, sweetbreads, etc. Felt great, but I'm also a foodie, and Jessa makes wonderful salads and casseroles, and I like to make these ferments, and I like to sprout seeds, and we love to garden. And so for me, from both a life enjoyment and also a social standpoint, it's too restrictive. If I had some serious autoimmune issues, and I have recommended to it before, either a paleo autoimmune diet or a nose to tail carnivore diet for healing up autoimmunity, but I think, after you've done it for like 8 to 12 weeks, it becomes more of just a pain in the ass, to get invited out to a restaurant, to arrive with your little Pyrex glass container with your testicle and your kidney suet so that you can have a meal. So yeah, I like the concept, but I also feel that despite perhaps plants originally being some kind of survival food that we would have relied upon when we didn't have access to large animals. And I even think that that's not quite true, and I'll explain why in a moment. Those same plant survival foods that we have developed entire meals and recipes and cultures and traditions around are now forms of social enjoyment that I think lend a great deal of variety and just enjoyment to food. And furthermore, I'm reading a book on the Spokane Indian tribe right now, right? And they would put baskets under the Spokane Falls near my home and get hundreds and hundreds of pounds of salmon per day during the salmon run. And there were so many deer and buffalo. They would, you've probably heard of this before. Their hunting method is they would literally just like drive them off of cliffs and then go collect all the carcasses at the bottom. I mean, they had meat and fish coming out their ass. And yet the whole time they were doing this, the women were at home collecting roots, collecting berries, collecting nuts, collecting grasses, and using those not just for medicines, but also to eat along with the salmon and the deer and the elk and the moose and the buffalo and the bison. And so I don't necessarily think that plants are just survival food, because there's no way that they would have had the women doing that all day while the men were out getting these massive amounts of meat. I think that was a part of their culture, as part of their society, and they probably knew that there were some beneficial effects in terms of either the effect on the gut or the effect on digestion or some of the medicinal effects or some of the hormetic effects of these plant compounds. And so I even think that even in human cultures who have historically had access to copious amounts of meat, that this so-called survival food of plants was not just survival food, was in fact used to dress up the diet.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with it was sort of a similar thing where like every time going on keto for a while, getting my metabolism right, get my glycemic variability, as you say, like to a point where I can handle a lot of different foods. Using carnivore as maybe a reset if I need to, but otherwise, like I don't feel that much different. And I actually, with how restrictive it is, I think that can lead to more stress than positive outcome of letting your body rest from not getting certain plant compounds. But yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately even if we should be able to tolerate them, I think that there's a sign that if you can't tolerate a lot of plant foods, your body probably isn't very resilient. You need to work on fixing a lot of underlying symptoms.
Right, exactly. So it should be used as a temporary diet, not as something that you rely upon for life, as God's gift to mankind and the ultimate truth of nutrition.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you haven't gone outside for a long time and went outside for one sunny day and got sunburned, you wouldn't go back inside forever.
Right, exactly.
And I think like finding out some sort of middle ground here where you can have plants and enjoy them and not feel like you're going to die, I think would be beneficial.
Right. And prepare them intelligently, right? Mm-hmm. When I made that cheesecake yesterday, it was like 5 times during the day I had to go and rinse and strain the nuts again. It was like this nasty brown water coming off the outside, but it was like, oh, I'm getting rid of all the crap on these nuts and actually making them digestible. Or my sprouts, right? Like I have to go and take care of those sprouts like a little baby changing their diaper, right? I got to rinse them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I rinse my sprouts. They don't build up mold, so they don't collect bacteria. And so they actually grow properly. And then I got to, activate them out in the light and then actually get them into an airtight container so they don't grow mold. So yeah, part of this just comes down to preparing your food properly and being comfortable with slow food preparation, with fermenting, with soaking, with sprouting, with ancestral preparation tactics that deactivate a lot of these plant defense mechanisms and render plants both digestible and more nutrient dense. And if you do that, and you also include, a nose to tail based, omnivorous approach, I think that's it's a fine way to eat.
Yeah, like you said, like this stuff has just been part of cultures for a very, very long period of time. So when you're going to a grocery store and eating the same raw spinach every single day and never varying your intake, yeah, you're gonna have problems.
Right.
And so your new book, Boundless, is just what was the story behind this? I mean, it's like I saw it, and this thing is like a giant textbook, like you would get in college, like not even a 101 course, but like a extended, like an advanced calculus course or something like that. Like, has it been just brewing in your background for the last 5-6 years, or what's sort of
about 3 years? I really got into studying anti-aging and longevity, everything from the blue zones to some of the Russian research on peptides to the bioidentical hormone replacement and anti-aging clinic proliferation in the U.S. and kind of wanted to write a book on how do you enhance things like your methylation clocks or your telomere length, but and that chapter in the book wound up being like a 150-page beast in and of itself. But, the book really developed into a tome more based on kind of 3 different parts: brain optimization, everything from nootropics to smart drugs to biohacks for the brain to, different practices for enhancing everything from mindfulness to cognitive function to IQ. And then the body section's all, strength, power, fat loss, muscle gain, recovery, biohacking the body, symmetry, beauty, sex, and then a lot of spiritual concepts in terms of gratitude, purpose, meditation, breath work, mindfulness, gratefulness, kind of woven in as well, because I just realized, especially as I was working on the longevity section, how intimately tied a lot of that stuff is to not only happiness, but also living a long and fulfilling life. And so by the time I finished weaving all that together a few months ago and actually published the book, it wound up just being pretty massive title.
Beastly.
Yeah, and there were like 500 pages. So the book is 650 pages, but there were like 500 pages that we just cut. That I saved all that. I didn't kiss all my babies goodbye. I put them online on the website, so everybody gets the book and kind of uploads their order number to the website. They get access to all of the hidden resources, all the cut content, a bunch of extra bonuses I made, PDFs of recipes and meal plans, and so yeah, I'm happy it's done, and may still follow it up with a little bit of a cookbook. Some of the stuff we've talked about on this podcast and even more recipes and meals, but not a diet book, not like this is the diet you should be following, more just like a collection of recipes I find interesting and enjoyable.
Yeah. And you have a new chapter in your book called Never Get Sick. I think like how to build an unstoppable immune system, which is, I think, very fitting for where we're at right now. I mean, has any of that changed as far as, if people want to have some tweaks for stopping viral replication or spreading or anything like that, or is it pretty much a fully loaded chapter that would stand on its own?
Well, with coronavirus, you want to be careful because there are actually things that can so-called, boost the immune system that may actually upregulate ACE receptor sensitivity, which we know is something that this virus tends to thrive upon is, by interacting with these ACE receptors in the respiratory tract. So, an example of that would be like, bee propolis, or, an example of something that may actually accelerate the inflammatory response, although the debate on this goes back and forth, could be like elderberry, right? Both of which are in that immune chapter. Mm-hmm. I would say you need to know what you're doing and be very selective to choose things that are directly antiviral, like glycerinic acid or oil of oregano or glutathione or N-acetylcysteine. Probably the 2 biggest things that I've been doing. And I know there's just like reams of information out there right now and an information overload as far as what can you do for your immune system. But biggest things I've been doing are the we already talked about, because all that's fantastic for the immune system and for stress. And also, things like CO2 and nitric oxide can also have some direct antiviral activity in and of themselves. But then I'm a huge fan of ozone. Ozone, I think, is one of the best health tools. I think if you have a family and you really want to take care of your family and have a cool thing at home to take care of them during issues like this, or sinus infections, UTIs, rectal issues, etc. I'm a huge fan of ozone. So I've been doing rectal or ear insufflation of ozone almost every day.
What does that look like? Is it a machine?
Then the other thing I have is
a balloon, or how's it look?
Yeah, just have a medical oxygen tank,
and
it hooks up to the ozone generator. You just want to choose a good ozone generator, because a lot of them will allow ozone to bleed into the air, and it's not great for your lungs, or they won't deliver an accurate concentration of ozone, so you might overdose or underdose. So I won't call it Quantum 5 ozone generator. And then the other thing is glutathione and N-acetylcysteine delivered to the respiratory tract seem to have a really good antiviral effect, and also because the lungs don't really have their own antioxidant system, can help out with that as well. So I bought a relatively inexpensive nebulizer from Amazon, and just once a day for about 20 minutes while I'm at work, working on emails and et cetera, I will nebulize glutathione and acetylcysteine, just like deep nasal inhales, deep mouth inhales, and even though it doesn't have antiviral effects, it's really good for biofilm, Lyme mold, mycotoxin, stuff like that. I put a little colloidal silver in there as well. So that's actually something that's used by a physician friend of mine for those Lyme and mold and mycotoxin patients who have developed biofilm in the respiratory or the nasal passages. But it's also really, really great in terms of antiviral activity as well. So those are kind of like two things that I normally wouldn't do for my immune system that I'm doing now on a regular basis, are ozone therapy and then nebulizing glutathione and acetylcysteine and colloidal silver.
Interesting. How do you anticipate or predict that people's general thought on health is going to change after we get through this pandemic? I mean, do you think people are going to care about immune system, just longevity, not getting sick, stop spreading germs?
I think you nailed it. Yeah, people are just going to be more mindful. They're going to be more aware of hand washing, whereas normally you'd give the Asians on the airplane a funny look when they walked on with their masks. I think we'll see more and more people doing things like that. And just being more hyper aware of immunity. And even more importantly, I think this social distancing is perhaps going to make a lot of people not only more productive at things like virtual work and remote work, et cetera, but hopefully bring communities and families and friends and folks together a little bit more, because you don't know what you have until it's taken away from you sometimes. And I think that, just not being engaged in a local community, not seeing your friends in the flesh and blood, just getting completely burnt out on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter because that's all you have. I think that folks will become more socially connected once this thing's kind of run its course. Yeah,
I'm hopeful as well, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you sharing our wisdom. Where can people find that the book bonuses and everything new that you have going on?
Yeah, I usually do a lot of my recipes, a lot of the things I just talked about. I'll put a cheesecake recipe up probably today over at Instagram.com/Ben Greenfield Fitness. My blog and my podcast is at BenGreenfieldFitness.com. And then the book is at BoundlessBook.com.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Hopefully see you in July.
Awesome, dude. Sounds good. Awesome barbecue.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.